And let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy almost UN Day. Although in our chapter and many other chapters across the country, we refer to October as UN Month. My name is Paula Bolan. I'm the president of the UN Association of the National Capital Area, one of the largest and most active chapters of the UN Association of the USA, which mission is to educate about the vital work of the UN, its specialized agencies, and to mobilize support for a strong US-UN partnership. We serve members in the DMV area through a variety of educational programs and advocacy activities. So if not yet a member, please join our movement and get actively involved by visiting our website at UNA-NCA.org. Our national theme for this year's UN Day is UN for US, or UN for Us, to emphasize how the United States and Americans need the United Nations. This year, more than ever, we must support, advocate, and protect the mission of the United Nations. Strong and consistent U.S. engagement with the UN is critical to advancing our nation's foreign policy, national security, economic, and humanitarian priorities. U.S. investment in the UN enables its agencies to deliver American values and services. There's hardly any aspect of our daily lives that isn't touched by our engagement with the UN, from the urgent issues like responding to conflict to the everyday activities like getting a package in the mail. The UN helps the US work. Today's coffee chat session will focus on the importance of international engagement in the upcoming presidential election. I will now pass it to my colleague, UNA-NCA's Advocacy and Digital Outreach Manager, Sarah Basil, who will moderate and introduce our guest speaker. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Ms. Paula, our fearless leader, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. On behalf of the Advocacy Committee, welcome to today's event. In case you haven't received a million texts and emails, we are for donations. We are officially 2 weeks away from the presidential elections here in the United States, which is super exciting. Before we get started with our discussion, I want to emphasize that this event is a nonpartisan effort. We're here to have an educational conversation on a topic that is more important than ever. And our speaker, Ms. Catherine Cross, is from the Better World Campaign, and she's a well-respected voice in this world. As you may know, the Better World Campaign is a nonprofit organization that works to foster a strong, effective relationship between the United States and the United Nations to promote core American interests and build a more secure, prosperous, and healthy world. At the Better World Campaign, Ms. Cross is the Executive Director of Communications, where she develops communication strategies for the Better World Campaign and other advocacy teams through the United Nations Foundation. We're so excited to have the opportunity to chat with her. And before we open up the floor for Ms. Cross's opening remarks, we have a brief video from the Better World Campaign to get us started. Please note that we'll also have a Q&A session towards the end of the event, so have your questions ready. All right, let me go ahead and grab that video. Give me one moment. Ms. Cross, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And because of technology, it can bless and burn. If you want to see the video, it got a little mangled, I think, because of Zoom technology, but you can find it on the Better World Campaign's website, and it was created with my wonderfully talented partner in all things, Liz Mitro. So it's nice to be with you all today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the UN for Us campaign, and what kind of motivated us, and what we're hoping to do with it. This is a campaign we realized, and there's some very specific reasons we realized that not everyone was looking at the UN the same way that we do and was seeing the same value that we see. And this is probably most notable in the fact that for the last 2 years, the House committee that's responsible for the UN's budget zeroed out the budget, basically. And this had never happened before in history. It was the first time it happened. It was a big surprise to us. And while the Senate later kind of corrected what we see as the House's kind of overreach when it comes to the UN, we saw this as being a bellwether event. This clearly means that the middle, of Congress that we could always depend upon to innately understand how the UN works in the US best interest, that middle seemed to be shrinking. So we realized we needed to change up our messaging somewhat, and we needed to say the quiet parts out loud. And what I mean by that is there is a whole system of almost invisible UN agencies that help the US in myriad ways, whether it's the International Maritime Organization, IMO, that regulates shipping, and most of America's exports are shipped over water, whether it's ICAO, which is the International Civil Aeronautics, I think it is, I can't remember, organization. That's how it is that we're flying through international airspace, without colliding. These are the rules of the road that these international agencies develop. And of course, as you know, there are probably 10 or 12 others that have a direct impact on American business. Now, we don't normally talk about those things. We tend to talk about all of the fantastic work that the UN does in the humanitarian realm, or the great work of UNDP when it comes to development, but we needed now to be really explicit that for the very small percentage of the US federal budget that goes toward the UN, and it's less than 0.2%, that America gets great value. And what you saw in that video is us making reference to WHO collaborating centers. There are collaborating centers, 70, as you saw, all throughout the US. There are 26 now, actually, UNESCO sites. That's it. Changed shortly after we made the video, and the 26 UNESCO sites around the world bring in millions and millions of tourist dollars. You can almost think of a World Heritage site, a UNESCO site, as having permanent free advertising around the world. So that is of incredible value, and we can go on and on and on. So our intent with the UN for Us was to switch it up a little bit, and to realize that for a fairly small investment, the US gets great value. And I'd be happy to answer your questions, and also to entertain any ideas that you might have, things that you've seen that you can share about the value that the UN brings to the US. So that's a little bit on the campaign. And I guess right at this point I'll turn it back over to Sarah, who I think is going to start in on some questions.
Sure, give me one moment to remove your spotlight. All right, so we have a couple questions for you, as you mentioned. I'll start us off with one that I think we all have in mind. Do international issues like climate change and human rights, really issues of critical importance at the UN, play a role in the 2024 US presidential elections?
Unfortunately, Not exactly. I'm using the Pew Research Center as the basis of my research here, and I've pulled up their latest poll that happened in September. And basically, the economy is the top issue for voters, and you've seen that over election cycles in years past. Healthcare is number two, Supreme Court appointees is number three, foreign policy writ large is number four, and violent crime is number five. Immigration, gun policy, abortion follows. So it's not a terribly big surprise that kind of these more global issues don't necessarily, make it into the top five. I think there's probably the more kind of quote unquote abstract an issue can be, probably, the less immediate, even though those of us who see climate change all around us consider climate change pretty immediate, but other people, don't necessarily share that view. But I think the more kind of the bigger and more abstract it gets, usually there's kind of an inverse relationship between that and voters' interests. And unfortunately, that's where I think climate change falls. However, if you dig down into data, you will find that there are big differences depending upon age, and younger voters, for all the obvious reasons, they're living with the impact of climate change. They will be living with it more than older voters, more than my age. So of course, it's a more immediate interest. So there is that kind of difference. But happy to see that foreign policy did in fact crack the top five.
Ms. Cross, you and I will know the statistics, and probably most people in this call, just because of our interest, know how much money the UN pumps into the economy of the US because of all the contracts and things that we do. We know that the economy is a big issue for Americans. Why don't we have that bridge made? I mean, I know we're all working for it, but how can we help support those efforts at a larger stage? Because we're talking billions of dollars in the US economy, and it's the number one thing for voters here.
You're absolutely right. And that also refers back to that video. You'll see that
Right.
the US won, at least there's a little bit of a lag in the data, but so the video is referring to data of 2022, and we had, $2.3 billion worth of contracts that went to, I believe it was 40 out of the 50 states, in varying amounts. And you can see more details on the Better World Campaign's website. Um, and I think, well, there are a few issues at work, and I think one, we need to get better at making sure states realize, that your state is in the top 10,
Right.
for instance, and we're just in the midst of cracking the data for the most recent year of statistics. We know that the overall number went down just a little bit, but the U.S. is still, out of all the countries that bid on UN contracts throughout the world, we know that the U.S. is still number one by far. But then we break it down. What the Better World Campaign does is we break it down by state. I think part of the reason, and it's a little frustrating on our side, part of the reason that you don't hear about this more is uh, companies that receive contracts sign a contract with the UN that say they won't advertise, about it.
That's
So
an interesting point. I don't think a lot
yeah,
of people
yeah.
know that. Yeah.
And you understand why that is. The,
Right. Of
the
course.
the the UN wants to focus on, the services that are being
Of
delivered,
course.
and the products that are being delivered, and as opposed to being a part of someone else's marketing campaign. However, from our point of view, boy, it sure would be great if we could get a bunch of American companies who could talk about
Right. I would personally
doing.
pay for the billboards if it meant people
Yeah,
would support the
I
UN.
know, I know. So this year, we're going to be even more aggressive in terms of making sure that these individual states, certainly those in the top 10, which, by the way, for those who are interested, usually almost always include DMV. And of course, New York tends to be number one. And strangely enough, Maine, the relatively little state of Maine was in the top 10 as well, the top three actually.
Ms.
Um,
Cross, I know a couple people will definitely ask about this. Are there any swing states in those top 10, top 20?
oh, what
Do you
a
know, do you
good
know that off the top of your head?
question. What a good question. I am sure there are. I don't know them offhand, but I can, kind of
We can find, yeah, we'll
Google
find
them
that
while
information.
we're
I know,
looking
I
at.
bet I'm not the only one thinking that. So
I'm sure you're not.
thank you. Thank you for those very insightful remarks. Definitely, I know I learned some stuff, so that's already off to a great beginning here. My next question to you is, to what extent do you think the U.S. presidential candidates consider the priorities or expectations of international organizations when formulating their foreign policy platforms?
Well, I'm going to recast the question a little bit, and I think that I don't necessarily think that that they take into consideration the UN per se. I think they start both Republican and Democratic campaigns begin with what are the US's needs. I think where you see a slight shift is in the understanding of the UN as a platform for the US to execute on its foreign policy. And I think some people think that it's a binary. If you're going to put money into the United Nations, that you're taking money away from the U.S. When in fact, what we've seen over time is that these things are very complementary. It's not an either or. And putting money into the UN, as we said in that video, is actually putting money into the United States. So I think it's a matter of how administrations view engagement, and we make the argument that that you won't agree with everything that a UN agency is doing, and these agencies represent. It's a member state organization. They represent 193 member states. You won't agree with everything. However, you need to be in the game. You need to be engaged. If you want things to change, then you need to lead that change, and that's what the Better World campaign has always believed is in the United States' best interest, and I think there's a long body of evidence to suggest and that it is in fact in the U.S.'s best interest when we work that way.
Sure. I mean, as a student of international security right now, all we talk about is the importance of dialogue on the international stage. And if we don't have our seat at the table, like Paula was saying with before we got started, we really lose a huge voice for our community. And so it's definitely of the utmost importance for us to maintain those relationships and stages. It's definitely an issue to think about here. All right, my next question for you is, given the polarized nature of American politics, how do you think the candidates' position on international cooperation and multilateralism will impact their appeal to voters?
Well, what we have seen time and time again is that when we poll every year, the Better World Campaign polls roughly 2,000 registered voters. And time again, even though we've switched polling companies, so even in data with the first polling company, which we can't really compare to current data because they use different methodologies. However, even given the different respective methodologies, Americans believe in engagement at the UN by a huge number. I think it's in the 70s. I want to say 75% for this year. That is both Republicans and Democrats. So there is this intuitive understanding, at least of registered voters, that the UN, that America is a global power, that the UN is a stage where global power, ideological battles, play out, and that if the US wants to continue to be a global leader, the US needs to engage there at the UN.
So do you think it's the fringes of most voters that are the 25% that are being amplified with their voices?
In terms of people who
Of being
don't
anti, yeah,
necessarily want,
yeah.
well, actually a percentage of that didn't have an opinion, so it's even much
Mm,
smaller than that.
interesting, interesting.
Yeah, so overwhelmingly I think people believe in engagement. What we've also found, which we've always found to be a very interesting statistic, is the less people know about the UN, the more suspicious they are of the UN. And it's kind of like anything. If
That's
you
with
don't know
everything,
about
yes.
it, Exactly. If you don't know about it, it's, I don't know, it looks big, it looks scary, it looks globalist. So, that really suggests that, all the efforts that we put in, whether it's Model UN, whether it's civics classes, no matter what it may be, to kind of educate people that the UN is an organization with American DNA. It's not some foreign, group that, that imposing its will. It's
This
made
was
up
our
of
idea. Yeah.
That's
This was
right.
our
It's made up
idea.
of
Yeah.
sovereign nations. Exactly. And being part of the UN doesn't at all impinge upon, U.S. sovereignty. So, I think that there is a large kind of educational component there. But we tried something a few years ago, which I think illustrates the point of when people understand more about the UN, they become more favorably disposed toward it. And that was this was the year that 2 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. We asked a question on one of our polls that said, "What do you think is the most important function that the UN is performing in Ukraine?" And we listed a bunch and we asked them to kind of rank them. And then we asked the question again about the Ukraine, about the UN and Ukraine. And um, people's approval of the UN's actions in Ukraine after having been given this choice that kind of laid out the many things that the UN was doing when it came to refugees, when it came to health, when it came to education, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Independence, which is always a good independent voters' approval for the UN's work in Ukraine jumped up 19 points
Wow.
when they realized. And I refer to that. There's only so far that you can extrapolate from that, but I do believe that it's perfectly in keeping with information that we have, that when people understand the UN better, then they understand how it works in the US's interests.
Exactly. And I know we're a UN focused group here, but I think a really good example of this phenomenon is also how Americans perceive NATO. Especially it's always in the news in the recent years, so it's definitely on par with that thinking. So thank you for that. My next question to you is, what role do you foresee international organizations playing in the US 2024 elections in relation to addressing misinformation and promoting fact-based discussions, especially on issues like climate change and global health? I think this is a great follow-up question, so I thought just ask it right away.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, this is a really tough one. And as a former journalist, it's a really painful one too, because from what I can tell, no one has cracked the how to beat mis and disinformation, how to crack that code just yet. The UN has done yeoman's work in terms of increasing people's critical skills, asking basic questions when you read or see something, to ask, how is that backed up? Where is this coming from? Do you know the source of this news? And so the UN is doing what it can with its Verify campaign to increase critical thinking, really, about mis and disinformation. And just to clarify, misinformation is defined as information that is inaccurate, but there's not necessarily ill will behind it. It means
Mm,
someone may have gotten something wrong.
right.
Disinformation is purposeful. It is meant to confuse, and it's got some intention there. And, the reason that the UN is so focused on mis and disinformation is it has absolute deadly consequences. There was a disinformation campaign in DRC. I believe it was 2 years ago, and it resulted in the deaths of peacekeepers, as a result. So it's not just oh, that crazy television show that talks about, or that crazy podcast. This is, the UN operates in worlds where disinformation can mean death.
Right.
If you're in the wrong place. But it is, it's an uphill battle. Part of the problem is we're living in a very fractured information universe. I mean, when I was growing up, there were, kind of these main newspapers where people got their news, and there were three broadcast stations, and Americans mostly got their news between their local newspaper and broadcast news on the showed every evening. And, that's not the world that we're living in anymore. It's completely, there's no shared front page. There's no shared set of facts. So we live in these different information bubbles, basically. And the scary thing is we seem to like it that way. While there is a segment of the population that I think is looking for reliable information and is genuinely confused about perhaps where to find it, but there's an equal, if not greater, segment of the population that simply wants their views to be confirmed, and they might even know that what they're getting is disinformation. But this, the wall between kind of entertainment and information has kind of become very permeable, and so part of this, part of the disinformation is even if you don't quite believe it, you're amused by it. So, it's a scary thing. And of course, the scariest thing is that disinformation is a moneymaker. And, fear and anger are powerful motivators. So if I'm bringing you news, so-called news that keeps you watching, that gets you to click, if I'm making money and lots of money. And so, that's a really different formula than I think what we've faced in the past. And I wish I could tell you I had an answer for it. I don't, but it's formidable, and I think that we just have to continue to fight the good fight. What we at the Better World campaign try to do is, if there is an issue and there's a fair amount of mis or disinformation around it, we try to write about it, and we try to say, you might have heard this. Here's what the reality is. So we do, here are the myths. Here's the truth. We source things. Here's where we got our information. So we use it as an opportunity to jump in and educate when possible. And then, of course, we try to put it out on social as well. And I think, that's what the UN is doing as well. And one plug for UN News that I'd like to make, if anybody ever looks at UN News, and I believe that's a site, is if you put in Google UN News, you will get to. It is a fantastic resource. I met the man that's heading it up. He's a former journalist with the Associated Press, and he has done such a great job. And because of the cutbacks in news organizations, sometimes UN News will have things that other news organizations won't. So, for those of you who might be kind of news hungry, I can highly recommend UN News to you. It's become a really terrific resource.
So, Ms. Cross, good news. We at UNA-NCA, we utilize it. I include it in the advocacy pulse that we send out. And like you said, it's one of the best resources. I have a quick follow-up for that. We know that the Better World campaign has a lot of congressional efforts. Are you guys utilizing the same information, or not utilizing the same information? Are we able to get these facts to congressional members and their staff too? I know that I've met with a lot of them who will say, "Oh, I didn't know ABC. I thought DEF." Are you having success with that? Is there room for improvement on that? What are your thoughts?
We can always do more. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But we have a philosophy when it comes to outreach to Congress that we like to meet people where they are. And you might not be interested in the UN overall, but you might be really interested in human trafficking, or opioids might be a big concern in your community, or and whatever it is, the issue that is that most excites you, there is more than likely a UN component where the UN is acting in a capacity for good that we can talk to you about. Sometimes it's a geographical interest. I know, people in Florida were very interested in Haiti. What we did is we organized the UN Foundation organized a trip to headquarters and arranged for Florida legislators and others to meet with UN experts on Haiti. And it's really, I think the thing that I love about the trips that the UN Foundation organizes, whether they be to headquarters or whether they be overseas, is that it's almost impossible to come back from one of these trips and not be wildly impressed with what the UN is doing. And the way these trips are organized, it's, they're not trips, oh, look at all of these great things that are happening. No, it's kind of what I consider to be journalistic DNA, which is to say, that UNF introduces you to all sides. You'll see the problem, you'll see what the solutions are, you'll see where there's been progress, where there hasn't been progress, why there hasn't been progress. So it's kind of a 360 view, of certain issues or how the UN is working in country. And I just got back from Indonesia on this, and I uniformly come back like an evangelist because the people are so smart that you meet. They're so passionate, and they're doing what I consider to be God's work, and just in places that in Kupang, Indonesia, where you're helping bring micronutrients to expectant mothers so that their children won't be stunted because they didn't have the proper nutrients. Just the day in, day out humanitarian and development work that these really dedicated and passionate humanitarians perform. And our trips are they're always bipartisan. Always have, we try for equal amount Democrats and Republicans, but it's impossible to come back from those things and not see the UN's value. So that's kind of that's one way, and that's a more long-term, long-range way that we try to reach out to members of Congress. But we also provide fact sheets. We provide there are events.
The handbook.
Yeah, when exactly a briefing book when UN officials, in fact, Sarah, you and I first met when Volker Turk, who is the chairman of the UN Human Rights,
yes,
High Commissioner for the Office of Human Rights, when he was in town, we organize events and we invite members of Congress, as well as staff on particular committees, who deal with human rights issues. And so there are many different ways that we try to kind of reach out, but our theory is to try to find, the interests that matter to the particular members or the staff.
Yeah. Ms. Cross, this is just a perfect example of what you're saying. I spent a lot of time in Lebanon with Syrian refugee camps where UN Women is involved. I've spent a lot of time in UNIFIL, which is the southern border, the UN force down there. And one of the most powerful things I've ever done in a meeting is grab my phone, pull out pictures. This is what they're doing. This is what they're doing. And I remember looking at the staffer and seeing that they were so moved by real life pictures that's not on the media, not from people like trying to promote something. And like you said, it's very powerful knowing what they're doing. And I hope that we can continue spreading the stories of how impactful the UN is, because that's the best thing that we can do to promote this amazing organization.
Completely agree.
All right. Our next question. All right. So how can the UN or other international bodies help elevate key global issues such as poverty or global inequality into U.S. electoral debates, which are often dominated by domestic concerns?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we tried to answer with our UN for Us campaign. I think constantly reminding people that we are not. Never before in history have we been more tied with the rest of the world, like it or not. There is no sticking our head in the sand here.
Yeah, we learned the hard way in COVID.
We learned the hard way in COVID. What happens over there, so to speak, matters to us here, whether we like it or not. And because of the US's power and because of its global reach, we have interests in more places. We have almost more exposure in a certain way. And of course, during 9/11, we learned that, the hard way that, that development or the lack of it, and in faraway places can come back, in ways to really hurt the U.S. So I think reminding people that we are, like it or not, fact of reality is we are interconnected. We are our brothers or our sisters' keeper, whether we want to be or not, and that to constantly kind of show, and global health, as you mentioned, is the best example. That these issues, it's in our best interest. We can do good and do well, if we help nations solve their problems, so that they don't become inadvertently exported and become our problems. And so, that's been, kind of the, again, trying to relate to people, and help them understand how kind of international we already are. I don't have the statistic in hand, but there are, dozens of American cities that have consulates, because they're conducting international business. It's very important to their community that they be able to be represented by other countries around the world. And I think sometimes to remind people of that, to remind them that, we already have in place, these touch points in, what you might think is just a solid American city. Well, the mayor is entertaining diplomats from all over the world. And so I think, climate has become, so politicized, but again, it's kind of, it's kind of hard to deny that the once every 10-year flood, are happening every other year, or the amount and the ferocity of the hurricanes. So, these are issues that require global solutions. And so, again, it's, we can be part of the group that's making the decisions on how to solve these issues, or we can let somebody else, attempt to solve them, which has never been kind of the American way. But we have to kind of get in there.
Would you say that it's important to emphasize the need to be proactive instead of reactive in a lot of these issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's the same argument as engagement, with the UN overall. We're a global player. We need to be representing our point of view. I mean, I think the current Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said it best and said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's, pretty much sums it up.
Fair point. Yeah, fair point. Great, thank you. Okay, we have two more questions left. We'll try to get this one in so we can have some time for Q&A. But do you anticipate any specific international issues, such as the situation in Ukraine or tensions with China, will play a pivotal role in the upcoming administration or incoming administration?
Absolutely. I think Ukraine has faded from the public consciousness a bit. We have short attention spans, and but I certainly think that Zelensky and Putin and NATO and Europe, and the EU, they're all looking, to see what happens with this election, because they're kind of estimating what their postures will be, depending upon who wins our elections. I think probably China will be, there's so much kind of bipartisan interest and energy in China and in China's relationship with the US. I think, that will be a big issue no matter who comes in. Of course, you also see it, playing out. China has become much more, even compared to 5 or 10 years ago, much more of a global player. The US is the number one UN donor, and China is a close second. And certainly when it comes to peacekeeping, China has really stepped up. They're contributing a hefty amount, to peacekeeping as well. So they are, in some ways, they have learned a lot from the American playbook, which at a time when it was a more bipartisan way to be. Engagement wasn't questioned perhaps as much as it is in this particular moment, in history. And people absolutely believed on both sides of the aisle that you had to be, you had to roll up your sleeves and get in there. So China will definitely be a big issue.
Perfect. Thank you. And this is the last question from us, and then we have a couple from the chat. But how do you think international organizations can help foster cooperation among U.S. candidates on nonpartisan global challenges such as pandemics or climate change during a highly partisan election cycle? Ended off on a positive note.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, these things, even though I'd love to think that they were nonpartisan, they actually, do take on a partisan cast. Even as something as simple as striving for better international coordination in pandemics, which is what the current pandemic accord seeks to do, even that has been turned into a partisan issue. And I think I think on a grand scale, kind of reframing the question, taking it out of the realm of, should we participate in greater coordination when it comes to global health issues, to how do we best, participate in greater coordination, talking about the means rather than the larger if, I think is certainly one way. I think we just have to continue to hammer what the facts are, that any kind of agreement, and I'm speaking about the pandemic accord specifically, but any kind of agreement about the pandemic accord does not infringe on U.S. sovereignty. Nothing that the UN does infringes on UN sovereignty. And that's a point that I know is important to Republicans, but it's of course important to Democrats as well. So I think we just have to continue to respond and to say, okay, these are the mechanisms that have been put in place so that we can do better, so that fewer people will die, including Americans, if and when there is another pandemic. And unfortunately, it's more of a when than an if, just based on what the science is telling us. And so it's almost, sometimes I think it's almost just getting back to basics, just saying, look, this is there is an enemy, whether it's viral or biological, there is an enemy out there, and we need to coordinate if we're going to stay safe from it, and here's one way we can go, here's another way we can go, but we should pick one and we should execute on it. So, I think, as a communicator, it's just maintaining our energy and our passion about, yes, we need to be doing this, and here's why. And and also I think there are some people, and it's always worth remembering that some people come to this, that we may disagree with their fear about America's sovereignty being impinged upon, but they come to it honestly, and to make sure that we are always providing a bridge for those who do have those feelings, to truly explain in a way that is that does service to their point of view, but also provides them with the facts so that they can come to a reasonable conclusion. Sometimes it's easy just to dismiss those things, and I have to remind myself that that the people of good faith hold these opinions, and to try to answer them in good faith as well.
Right. Right. Having those important conversations is more important than ever. Ms. Cross, those are the questions for me. We have a couple from the chat, from the Q&A aspect of Zoom webinar. For our audience, if you want to include some more, but I will start with this one. I think was pretty cool. It says it's from an anonymous attendee, but it says, how can we, as engaged citizens, articulate the importance of the rules-based international order and multilateral institutions to low propensity voters?
I think, again, it's a similar strategy to what, we use with Congress, which is to say, what are you most interested in, as a voter, what concerns you? And then to try to connect that with some of the UN's good work. Sometimes it may be it may be just basically explaining, what the UN does, taking some of the mystery out of it. I've long believed that as beautiful as that, big building is on Turtle Bay, that it sometimes works against us because people look at it and it looks big and scary. And to remind people, that in fact, that may be the building, but there are a lot of beating hearts behind those walls and people who are in it for all the right reasons and, trying to make this world a better place. So I think, sometimes for people, it's just not taking anything for granted. I certainly know a lot more about the UN now than I did when I joined, some 6 or 7 years ago, and so just to say, hey, the UN was behind, the founding of this. And when people say, yeah, but the Security Council can't do anything, well, you're right. It's a problem that it's been, hidebound and vetoes prevent progress. However, it was the US that was one of the proponents of that veto back when the UN was formed, and we were kind of coming up with the rules of this organization. So it's kind of reminding people, if needed and if welcomed, of what the UN does, and demystifying it a little bit. And then, I think when, like I was saying, when we travel, man, when you see this overseas, when you see what our UN colleagues are doing overseas, I mean, it just brings out the best in you because, I think to myself, boy, do I have it cushy? I go into an office,
An AC.
right, type things, and here people are teaching, farmers in one of Indonesia's 17,000 islands, how to farm sustainably so that they can feed their families and so that their village, isn't dependent upon aid. They can be self-sustaining, and that's just, how can you argue with that? I mean, that's just good stuff.
Thank you, Ms. Cross. We have this next question from a new member of our advisory council. Hello, Mr. Jeff Meir. He asks, the U.S. finds itself often on the losing side of lopsided voting at the UN. How can the campaign counter the image that the UN is a glorified debating society which is fully opposed to the U.S. perspective?
Well, I'm not sure, Jeff, that I agree with the premise that what comes up in debate is automatic. If I'm understanding you correctly, is automatically skewed to be an anti-U.S. Perspective. I think that there will be, votes that we like, that we don't like. We will abstain from what we want to abstain from, but we've also led some, really effective coalitions. And of course, probably the most famous in recent history is when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that was the work of great diplomacy. The U.S. behind the scenes had been kind of telling its allies and others that this is what it looks like Russia is fixing to do. And people said, no, can't be. They would never do that. They wouldn't do that. Well, in fact, when it happened, and then shortly thereafter, and I guess that was February of 24. And then within, I think it was 2 weeks after the invasion, the UN was able to corral a coalition of countries, 144, I can't remember the exact number, who basically condemned Russia's actions. That was the work of, that was American, I think, diplomacy and coalition building, at its finest. Yeah, I guess, and I'm happy if I've misunderstood the question. Feel free to have another go at it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Cross. This next question is from the immediate past chair at UNA or of our board, Ms. Jill Christensen. She asks two questions. I'm going to focus on this one because I think it's a little bit more timely, but she goes for discussing the impact of site. She says, thank you for discussing the impact of site visits for congressional leaders. How can we be sure that more leaders take advantage of these? I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you answer that, Ms.
Yeah.
Cross.
Well, we're only limited by the congressional calendar at this point. And we have a trip to headquarters coming up in December, and we had an incredible response. 22 congressional members, these were freshman members specifically, and we wanted to introduce them to the UN. 22 members, that's a big trip. So we're finding that there's an appetite there. I'm also happy to say that UNF has a great track record. We are trips that people want to take, and not because they're easy, not because they're junkets. They are exhausting. You're up at 6 a.m. and you usually have a working dinner that ends at 10, and then you do it all again the next day. So these trips are really jam-packed. So I'm happy to say that demand has not been an issue. The only thing that's an issue is, the finding the time in the congressional calendar that we can actually put together trips, because otherwise, obviously, if Congress is in, no one can go. But it's a lovely problem that we're having in terms of people who need to go.
I think we have time for one more question. This is from an anonymous attendee. He says, or she says, or they say, what financial numbers can we offer to contrast the budget to the benefit, I think, of the United States is what they were saying, which is, I think, highlighted in the beginning portion of our discussion, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight this again.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I'm so glad you asked that question, because if you ask people randomly, like, what percentage of the federal budget goes to the UN, you'll hear people say, 25%, or, 20, and then you said, do you realize it's 0.2%? Which is just, shocking to most people. So that's one, that's one number. It's a very overall, relative to the federal budget, which is big, but relative to the federal budget, it's a very, very small percentage. And the other thing to recognize is that we get more in contracts than we actually pay in dues. There are a number of different ways to look at the UN budget, but there are two specific budgets. One is what's called the regular budget. The other is the peacekeeping budget. But when you add these together, the U.S. still gets more in contracts for goods and services from the UN than we pay in dues. Now, there's also one asterisk to that number. There's also voluntary spending that the U.S. decides it's in their interest. And so that number voluntary spending isn't included in that number. But, from a strictly dues perspective, clearly we come out ahead.
Perfect. Ms. Gross, I think we have actually time for one more question. I know we're not going to get to all of them, but Daniel asks, how serious is the UN working to create jobs for immigrants in the U.S. to engage in investment? It's a good question.
Well, I can't, unfortunately, Daniel, I can't speak to it because I don't know about the ins and outs of U.S. immigration policy, to be honest. So I wouldn't be able to comment intelligently on that one. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cross. We are about to wrap up, so I wanted to give you a couple moments to provide any concluding thoughts you wanted to kind of share with the group. So whenever you're ready.
Sure. Well, first of all, just thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support of the UN, for your interest, for your good questions. I would say, one of the best antidotes, I think, to all of the peculiarities of our political environment, if you can still find time to reach out to people who disagree with you, and if you can, make the case in a reasoned and compassionate way, that maybe we can start healing some of these divides within our own country. But mostly, so happy to be among people who feel about the UN as I do, as I know my colleagues do, which is to say, it's not a perfect organization, but it is absolutely a force for good in this world, and will continue to be with your support.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cross. We really appreciate the time that you took to chat with us today, but also for all that insightful information. I know I learned a lot, and this is what I do. So this is always super appreciated. Paula, did you want to say a couple words before we close it out?
Just to thank Catherine and the Better World Campaign, UNA USA, along with our chapters across the country for helping in spread the word about the critical work of the UN and its specialized agencies, and to continue to advocate for strong US engagement in the international community, in the UN. As Catherine said, the UN is not perfect, but it's made of all these countries. Ours plays a critical role in it. So we want to be engaged in all the efforts that are underway to make the UN more fit for this century and to tackle all the global problems that we have. There's really no other problems. All the issues that we face are our issues. They don't recognize any borders. So this is the body, the convening body that we have. So nations, diplomats, along with civil society and the private sector, can work together for a better future. So thank you everyone for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Catherine. I